Hello, everybody, and welcome to another talk. Today, I'm going to be speaking with Peter Jackson-Main. Before we just kick off, I like to give a little bit of background about why I've asked these people on, and how I know them and stuff like that. So, a little bit of background. Peter's actually my iridology teacher. I studied way back in probably 2002. I was trying to think of when it was last night. 2002.
It was around then, yeah. It was while we had our premises on Mill Road in Cambridge. We actually had a shop, and I think we were doing it around the corner in the
That's
back
it.
hall.
Yeah, it was really
Um,
good. I've always got fond memories of that. It was a nice setup. It was very kind of personal. Everyone, we were all in this little room. We had the bioscope there, the books, the slides. It was a good group. Obviously I guess every group that comes through has their quirky qualities. The one I was with, they were all very nice people. Got on very well with
I
them.
think that was one of the best we had, to be honest, Andrew. You were lucky to catch that one.
So that was great. That gave me a great. I'd already had a little bit of read at the time before. I didn't know much about physical, and I just thought it would be good to get a bit of a handle on the physical model. And Peter was recommended as the sort of the top person for that job, so I signed on. And we've just kept in contact over the years. Obviously, always interested to see what Peter's up to. He's recently just updated his iridology book, and he's got another one, which is we'll go into all the books and what you're doing. So, iridology teacher, naturopath, herbalist, lecturer. I mean, many strings to Peter's bow. So, why don't you, for the benefit of people watching this, maybe go into a little bit of your background, how you got interested in this subject, and just generally in healing, and just give people a sort of flesh out who you are and why you do what you do.
Yeah, sure. Well, I guess in a way, I've never really done anything else. I mean, I went to university in the 1970s to study English literature, which was a bit of a damp squib, to be honest. I mean, I went there because I fancied being a writer, and I think it put me off being a writer. I've just latterly, of course, been writing books, but not the sort I wanted to write initially. And it also gave me the opportunity to abuse myself. Royally with various malpractices, having sort of just escaped from the shelter of the home environment. And I ended up a little bit, the worse for wear at the end of it all. And a girlfriend of mine pointed me in the direction of someone who just started up practice in Cambridge at that time. And that was Farida Sharan, who, of course, is well known in the iridology circuit herself. So I was one of her first clients, actually, one of her first patients. And I was just completely captivated by what she was doing. She was a herbalist, she was a naturopath, Jensen trained, and, of course, an iridologist. And it would just blew my mind. And I thought, right, I want to know more about this. Plus, at the time, helped by the fact that there were really no jobs for people with arts, degrees in the late 70s. So she offered me actually to join her in some of the workshops she was running. It wasn't a training course as such, but it was just the opportunity to look into some of the things that she was doing, like the naturopathic diet, nutrition, something called zone therapy. She introduced me to polarity therapy. And at one particular point, she brought Dr. Bernard Jensen to Cambridge
Oh
and
wow,
gave me a free ticket to
wow.
sit at his feet for a week, which was probably one of the big kind of eye-opening moments of my life for sure.
What was he
Uh,
actually like to meet in person? Was he kind of
uh,
as you
Brilliant.
expected, or yeah?
Such a nice man, and so inspiring. Yeah.
How different to what you experienced with her back in those early days to what we're kind of doing now? Has a lot changed in the interim? Has iridology really kind of moved on as a science? From your initial discovery to now, would you say it's vastly different, or a little bit different, or
Not vastly different. I think that Farida had met Denny Ray Johnson already, and had picked up a bit from him, and you can see that in her book, which was written about the same time that I knew her originally. And so the sort of what I call the non-physical applications in iridology were on the cusp of being discovered and transitioning into mainstream iridology. So it was no longer, by the time I met it, it was no longer that sort of hard and fast expect changes in the iris, and if it doesn't happen, then you're not getting better, and all the rest of it. So we'd already sort of moved on from there, which was good. I was fortunate enough to catch on to that part of the bandwagon, I guess. And then a little bit later, it took me a few years to, I mean, I just started putting my own training together at that point. I did what a lot of people did. I studied, there was a very cheap course in anatomy and physiology because everybody needs that. And I went and did that. And I went and did a course in massage, as everybody did at the time. It was the easiest thing to start with. I was a masseur professionally for a while. I didn't really like doing it, and I gave it up pretty quickly. But then I got into polarity therapy, and again, I was a polarity therapist. I made my living as a polarity therapist for 5 years before getting a little bit disappointed that it wasn't making me, I couldn't go and buy my house or a decent car or anything like that. It was really subsistence level. And then by the merest chance and a moment of illumination, I found the College of Herbs and Natural Healing, which was being run at the time by Kitty Campion, but was a sort of an offshoot of the Dr. Christopher School of Natural Healing, the eclectic, the North American eclectic herbal practitioner, Dr. John Christopher. And it was that tradition that I really loved too, because I knew I wanted to study herbs, but I was looking for something a little bit different than medical herbalism. I wanted something more inclusive. I wanted a naturopathic approach, I guess, a whole system of medicine rather than just herbs as almost like ersatz drugs. So I was looking for something which would provide a context for healing. And that I found in this particular school. Of course, the key teacher for herbal medicine was Dr. Richard Schultz, phenomenal and legendary Dr. Schultz. So, I mean, after I met Dr. Schultz, I didn't look back. I was like, this is actually what I'm here to do. And then shortly after that, I was introduced to, I mean, Schultz himself was an iridologist, of course, as was Dr. Christopher. And I was then introduced to Harry Wolff, who was the sort of new kid on the block making a name for himself as a whiz kid iridologist. And again, my mind was blown twice, once by Richard Schultz and the next time by Harry. And I guess that was my real introduction to iridology. I mean, I took iridology from Farida in terms of a diagnostic thing, and it was interesting, but I wasn't super buzzed about it. I was more buzzed about the naturopathy, to be honest. But when Harry came along, suddenly it was like, whoa, this is extraordinary stuff. And he would do the most, I mean, we'd always finish any of his seminars, and I attended many, with him giving individual readings in front of the class to every individual in the class. It sometimes took the whole day to do. And I was just really impressed with the agility with which he moved from, discussing liver stagnation all the way through to, if you don't sort your problems out, your authority problems out with your father, you might get stomach cancer. And and it's sort of, it struck me as being such a multi-level thing. And at the time, of course, he was also, Harry was working with Daniele. And so I got an introduction to time risk as well.
So just going back to when you were doing the herbalism, was iridology actually being taught as part of that herbalism?
Yeah.
So and how many people there were iridologists?
Well, I mean, the first leg of the training that I joined, there are about 20 of us on the course, and that took place over a course of several months, but with one particular intensive teaching retreat in southern Spain, actually, which was rather nice. It was in November, so it's a little bit chilly, but it was pleasant. And we were in the Alpujarras, which are the foothills of the Sierra Nevada, with Dr. Schultz and a few other people. And then the second year, we then sort of graduated up to doing the iridology component. At the time, they were being run separately, but it was also made very clear that the thing that distinguished the course was its naturopathic focus. It wasn't just about the herbs; it was about the whole package. And then and they made it very clear that we also needed to be able to diagnose people effectively, and the diagnostic system that they had chosen was iridology. So it wasn't compulsory, but it was a no-brainer that you go on and do the iridology component next. And that was another nearly year of study by the time you finished all your assignments. That was so it was within the same course, within the same school, and we took it as within the same course structure as well. And there are other add-ons as well. There was physical therapy. I mean, Schultz himself was trained in polarity therapy and various other forms of holistic body work. And then there was the naturopathy itself, of course. So there was a lot to learn, and unfortunately, it was all available under that umbrella.
Yeah, and then I always think as well, the eye is such a great inroad into health just generally. It's so obviously you can see it very easily. You don't need any real special equipment to have at least a sort of cursory look with it. And then also you've got this tradition, if you look at like the older medical systems, like Chinese medical systems, the Ayurvedic systems, even though they're not specifically talking about iridology, but there is some relationship to the eye, to the organs, to the health of the body. I mean, even I suspect probably at the turn of the century, if you used to go to the doctor, they used to pull down the eyelid and have a look and look in your eye, and all that's of course.
Well, actually, more recently than that, I remember my doctor looking in my eye with a torch and loop, and I don't know what he was seeing. I never asked him because to me it was at the time it was just normal. But I suspect, I mean, actually, iridology was known about and taught in medical schools in the UK up to 1940, I think, something like that. And in France till much later, till at least 1970. And in Russia, they stopped teaching about the year 2000. I found out the other day that, you know, the other big center of research for iridology is Korea. And I have a Korean student in one of our herbal medicine classes at the moment, and he said they finally also ditched iridology in Korea as well.
Right.
But you know, it was taught in a medical context far more recently than most people realise.
Yeah, I noticed a lot of papers online, scientific papers coming out of Korea when I've sort of done a little bit of research on like eye color and genetics of eye color and stuff. A lot of it was coming from Korea, which was interesting. So, what's your kind of main focus these days? I mean, you're kind of obviously you've just rewritten the book. So you did your well-known practical iridology book, which came out I think 2004, something like
That's
that.
right.
Yeah. So you've recently given that a facelift. It's a much more intensely rich volume. It's bigger. It's got really amazing pictures in it.
Well, I was lucky enough to get a contract in the year 2004. Well, the year before that, it was published in 2004. And it came about again, one of these coincidences that are not really coincidences, of course. I had a client, I had a patient who happened to be working for Carolyn Brown, the London publisher. And she said, this is the sort of, you know, what you're doing here. I was working with her as a herbalist, but as part of that, of course, we did an iridology examination. And she said, you know, we'd be so interested in publishing something along these lines. She was a senior editor. And I said, well, I've been looking for somebody to pay me to write a book. So that sounds like a good idea. You know, it sounds like a fortuitous meeting. And they commissioned a book. And they even gave me an advance. Now, that doesn't happen anymore. It was handy at the first, but then, of course, you pay off your advance by selling books. So you don't get any royalties for years. And at the point, actually, when Practical Iridology, the first book, the point where it actually broke even and paid off my advance, they sold it without royalties to an American publishing company, Whitman.
Oh, right.
And at that point, I thought, actually, hang on a minute, and I could have sued them. Apparently, it was illegal, although there might have been something between UK law and US law that permitted them to do it. But I thought, I'm not going to bother fighting them for it. I'll just rewrite the book and reissue it. Unfortunately, AEON took it off me and ran with it, and I was really pleased to be able to do it. It was a lot more work than I'd anticipated because, first of all, I couldn't find the original manuscript. It was on an old Macintosh computer that I'd long since junked, and I didn't keep a copy. I did back it up, but I think the backup disk failed, so I hadn't got anything to go from. But somebody actually managed to scan the original book, and I worked from that. And I found that I wanted to rewrite most of it. To be honest, I mean, I think it is pretty much a new book. The organization of it is very similar. I've added a couple of chapters and I've expanded lots of it. And
The original is kind of more what I would call like a graphically pleasing, but it's more general appeal. Whereas the new one, but you can tell it's I wouldn't say it's like only for students of. Of course, interested people could still read it, but you can see there's much more of a clinical emphasis, and it would be much more useful to a student of iridology. It's the organization, the layout, the photographs. It's much better. You know, it's a huge improvement.
It is, I have, a couple of students have actually come up to me and said, "Well, I really like the old book. I think there's still a place in the marketplace for that." And I have another school of naturopathy who orders the books, and they didn't want the new book at all. They just wanted to order the
Really?
old one. I hadn't, no, I hadn't got many copies left of it actually. So and I'm not ordering any more from Whitman. They've had all they're going to get from me. So it seemed the right thing to do to republish and allow me to sort out some of the problems that had sort of accumulated in Practical Iridology version 1, which I had asked Carolyn Brown to do for the future, because it was, I think it was published in 3 editions in all. It was very successful. I mean, each edition of 175,000 copies, which, so we're getting on for sort of 500,000 copies sold worldwide, which was pretty good, published in 12 languages. So can't complain about it at all, but I was, it run its course, I think, and there was definitely a place for a new one. That's where I just contacted AEON on the off chance, really, and said, "Would you be interested?" And they just snapped it up. So
They've got a really good. I quite often just browse through their website, and they've got a good selection of. There's a lot of herbal books. It's not just iridology, and many all different subjects around healing, health, and so they've got a good. There's a good library of books there, and I like the finished quality of the new one's very good. It's got that sort of nice,
yeah,
well bound, weighty. It feels substantial when you hold it,
very
which is
substantial,
always good with a book.
very impressive stuff. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
I can see the cover behind you there. You've got the. Where
I've
did you
got
get the? Where did you actually get the image? I mean, that's come up really good. I like the blue and the brown, the two sort of two
I
ends
think
coming
that's a
out.
great image, to be honest with you. They found it.
Mm,
They sourced the cover image. They like to do that side of things themselves. I don't know what your experience with them was. I had a bit more trouble with the cover to the mind's eye. Uh,
mm,
I'm quite pleased with it as it's turned out, actually. It did, but the first couple of drafts, I was like, no, it doesn't have the impact. So I sort of
mm.
sent it back to them and said, work on it.
Oh,
But I've not really had to do much about the presentation of the book. I'm just very pleased with the way they did it. I mean, it was good working with them and with the editing team there. The Mind's Eye came about because even before it even occurred to me to republish Practical Iridology, I had already started to write a book on what I call the non-physical applications
mm,
in iridology, because they'd always been a big part. I mean, when you studied with me back in 2002, at that time we were still including some of this material.
mm.
I remember getting you to do a presentation on RAID for us
Yeah, I
as
think I got thrown in front of everyone.
and it really got my juices flowing as well. But in the end, that course, which now is not being run because all my iridology teaching now takes place under the banner of College of Naturopathic Medicine. Just they do all the organisation. I just turn up and teach, which suits me.
Mm,
I do postgrad work, but not the undergraduate basic training. I mean, I don't. Now I teach it, but I don't put my own training on anymore. But we lost out a little bit because we were having trouble recruiting people into the Cambridge course actually, and one of the reasons for that is because it was too long. It was 9 weekends, and the last 3 weekends were all devoted to the sort of non-physical, the weirder stuff, the time risk, etc.
mm,
And nobody else was doing it, so they were all undercutting me in both time and money.
mm,
So eventually, reluctantly, we made the decision to cut the course down to 6 weekends and provide the non-physical, the behavioural, etc., as a kind of an add-on. But it didn't really do so well, to be perfectly honest with you. And then I was picked up by CNM and started teaching for them, and the whole thing sort of went into abeyance,
mm.
where it's pretty much been ever since. I mean, who knows? It might resurrect at some point, but But it was I was starting to get more interested in what I could do to develop the classroom experience, and that's what CNM gave me the opportunity to do.
Mm,
And what I mean by that is, well, the sort of thing that you experienced when you were learning with us, having the right equipment on hand, organizing the course so it was a nice balance of theory and practice, because practical is the word. It's what
mm,
it's chosen for the first book. And gradually, I started to sort of study. That I brought Jim Burgess over to Cambridge. I think it was 2003, actually, the
mm,
following year after you worked with us,
mm,
and I spent some time with him learning the behavioural stuff. And I began to get very interested in the whole sort of PNEI angle of iridology, the way in which you could start to link physical problems, pathologies, symptoms, etc., to an emotional base.
mm,
And I think that the emotions, my particular viewpoint on this is that in some way, in many cases, the emotions are primary, because in the sort of energy flow, they are the primary distortions, and they then filter through to the physical body. And that was an insight that first came to me through polarity therapy, actually. So I'd had a fair amount of grounding in
mm,
understanding things from that direction, understanding things energetically. And actually, I know that this particular, what you're doing here has a particular focus with Ayurveda. Uh,
mm,
in the interests of full disclosure, I should say that polarity therapy is very, very sort of probably about 50% of polarity therapy is Ayurveda,
mm.
because Dr. Stone, who articulated that system, did most of his work in India. In fact, lived in India for the last few years of his life, and so he would have had a lot to do with Ayurvedic physicians. And you can see it's a lot of things he was talking about, the doshas, the gunas, the elements, etc., are pure Ayurveda. So I have that in my background as well.
Mm.
I was
So
interested in
subconsciously bubbling along in
yeah, exactly, yeah. And I always thought, and then I started as a herbalist, I started to get interested in humoral medicine, which
mm,
again is very, very closely connected to Ayurveda through the Middle Eastern Tib tradition.
mm,
And the humoral medicine of Europe, which sort of, like they say, started with Hippocrates, probably a lot earlier than that, and reigned in Europe for the best part of two millennia, basically,
mm,
is something that got knocked out of the picture completely when scientific medicine, cellular pathology, and all of that stuff came along. And unfortunately, I think it was a bit of a case of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I mean, if you go to China and you get treated by a TCM practitioner, they're also a medical doctor. If you go to India and you get treated by an Ayurvedic doctor, they're also a medical doctor. And,
mm,
and then the state system includes the traditional medicine alongside. In China, they just bolt things on. Chinese medicine, traditional Chinese medicine anyway, is not one system, it's several systems. It's, one thing's bolted to another.
mm,
Taoism, Confucianism is bolted onto Taoism, and it kind of rolls and gathers as it goes through the centuries. And the latest thing, of course, that they bolted onto it was modern medicine. And that's why a lot of the major research in herbal medicine happens in places like India and China and also Iran, because these are the people who've taken their traditional medicine seriously enough to
mm,
subject it to rigorous research.
mm,
So I was interested in why we hadn't done that in Europe. And interestingly enough, I was just on a call with Dylan Warren Davis
mm. Yeah,
yesterday,
yeah.
who's very keen to champion a sort of reintroduction of traditional knowledge in Western herbal medicine.
Mm,
And it occurred to me, one of the things that occurred to me was that in the humoral tradition, there's no separation between mind and body. It's all one continuum. That really happened, I guess. Poor old Rene Descartes gets the blame for it. Post-Cartesian dualism, the idea that thinking is somehow different from being. That the body is different from the mind, and If you look into the humours and the temperaments, particularly, we use words like melancholic and phlegmatic and sanguine, and the other one, which is choleric, and
Mm,
they describe the four elements of air, fire, water, and earth, and they're not they give rise to certain physical attributes and sometimes issues and problems, but they're also closely bound up with the kind of total energy structure of
mm,
that person. And it occurred to me that the iris was a perfect place to look if you wanted to really assess that. And that's the basis of the book, The Mind's Eye, really. It starts off trying to be a humoral approach, not a humorous approach, but a humoral approach to using iridology as a diagnostic method and an assessment method
mm.
that can take in the whole person and navigate, if you like, some kind of connection between the various levels of our experience, the mental, the emotional, the physical, and perhaps and the energetic maybe as well. Yeah.
In the my behavioral book, I obviously integrated Ayurveda because that's what I'm particularly interested in. But when I went back and thought about it at the early days of Red, I was there sort of 1999, like Orcas Island in the States, and then he used a lot of Chinese terminology. Yin and Yang was particularly popular, but he would use a lot of those analogies in what he was doing. And I was thinking about that, and I just thought it was probably because prior to the sort of late 90s, early 2000s, just there wasn't really much Ayurvedic lingo going around. It was yet to find its footing, and those kind of big promoters like Treya Smith and Vasant Lad and Dr. Svoboda, all these people were kind of popularizing it. But I suppose the Chinese analogies were much more to hand, weren't they? There was a lot already known. There was a lot of work already out there, and it does lend itself very well to Chinese, even when he's talking about like things like the birth order. There's sort of like a connection to the I Ching and stuff like that. The
Yeah.
family of the characters, the hexagrams and whatever. It all kind of. I think that's what he was heavily influenced by. I've tried to make it more Ayurvedic because that's what I'm interested in.
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily sure if any one humoral system works better than another. I think it's what you feel you like to work with, and then you can use that. Like for instance, I think we had a conversation a long time ago. Salim Khan, he's really into his obviously because he's Unani Tib, he really likes to use those Tib terms, in terms
Yeah.
particularly with color and temperaments and stuff like that. So I think we just work with what we feel comfortable with. So you're coming from a herbal background, but would you be more like melancholic, sanguine, that kind of tradition because of the herbs, or?
Well, I think to okay, firstly, the difficulty with the European humoral tradition is that we lost it, we threw it away, and we're just some of us, and Dylan is one such, and I'm another, and people like Graham Tobin and Vicky Pittman, who is also on the Ayurveda side. Okay,
Mm,
well, you probably know about Vicky's work.
yeah.
I mean, I remember having a conversation with Vicky and Graham a long time ago at some festival, herbal festival in Somerset, and we sort of sitting around with a pint of beer or something and saying, we should really resurrect the Western energetic tradition, and that was like 30 years ago, and nothing much has happened except that we do have a few people. We also have Steve Taylor, for example, who's done something recently on humoral medicine, a lovely book. So it is happening, but it takes time. When you chuck a tradition away and you just don't pay it any attention, it kind of withers, and it
Mm,
has to somehow, you have to breathe the life back into it or rehydrate it, possibly, for it to become meaningful again. So, meantime, when I started teaching for CNM, the idea there was they wanted to introduce energetic medicine back into the naturopathic field, because we in the College of Naturopathic Medicine, we do see Ayurveda as a naturopathic tradition, and we see traditional Chinese medicine as a naturopathic tradition. And so the obvious place to go was TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, and that's what ended up being taught as part of naturopathy, actually, in the CNM naturopathy course, and still is. And so that's where I first encountered that, having been to acupuncturists and all the rest, and had these weird diagnoses like, you're suffering from an external invasion of wind. You what? What the hell does that mean? But not
they're
really.
great terms, though. I love them. They're just great.
They're lovely, yeah. And so that's sort of And I loved the Chinese system. I didn't fully understand it. It took me a while, probably. It was very unfamiliar terminology, a very unfamiliar way of looking at things. But I do use a lot of it in my practice. Use a lot of the insights, and you can see it coming through in the new book, In the Mind's Eye, as a sort of fundamental theme, if you like. Ayurveda, we had a very, very good Ayurveda teacher or herbalist on the herbal medicine course who was big into Ayurveda, Sarah Williams. Do you know
Oh,
Sarah?
Sarah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and she taught for us for a while, and as a result, and of course Ed Berger was with us, and he was very heavily into the Ayurveda as well. And as a result of that, and he was a good mate of Sebastian Pole, and as a result of that, we incorporated 4 days. 4 days, hardly a degree in Ayurveda, but a good introduction maybe into the herbal medicine course, and that remains there. And the rationale for doing all of this is not to turn people into Ayurvedic practitioners or TCM practitioners, but as you said, really to give a choice. Show people what's out there, and then if they want to do their own research and take it further, they can. And a lot of people do that. A lot of people, particularly with Ayurveda, actually, the students really like the Ayurveda component, and many of them have gone on to do further training in Ayurveda, which is very encouraging. But for me, I don't really like to sort of create any kind of hierarchy between energetic systems. Like you said, it's what fires you up. And for me personally, I'm still kind of very much going down the track of wanting to open up and reinvigorate the Western tradition. I don't know how fully that can be done because Western minds have been shaped by entirely different forces, and I think that it can be a difficult transition to try to, But I have hopes that. And I think it can. This is one of my sort of mission statements with iridology. It stands in. It's a recent development in the scheme of things. It only popped up in the middle of the 19th century, and I think it can stand in for an energetic and humoral approach. It gives us something a bit more. It doesn't fit into the paradigm of standard medicine, orthodox medicine at all. They don't understand it. They don't want to, they're scared of it. They don't want anything to do with it. It doesn't make sense to them.
We're talking about humoral models. Just using the eye color as a base is a great starting point for just a constitutional analysis. And I find that generally across the board, it does very well. Of course, you go into more detail with structure and actual positioning, but just the eye color model is a good starting point.
Absolutely, yeah.
So just let's circle back and look a little bit more at the mind's eye. I'd like to sort of go into that a little bit more detail because obviously that's kind of very close to my own interests as well. So I'll be honest with people, I only got the book a while back, so I haven't had a good read of it. I've had more than a skim, but less than a deep read. So I've gone through it. You've got a great section on there which kind of explains like introduction, why you did it. Then you're kind of moving into, it talks a little bit about red. You've got some space risk, you've got some time risk. There's this section in the middle that I'd like to concentrate on, which is really your kind of own, which is like the main piece of the work, but it's inherently what you're bringing to the table. I should say there's lots of good examples in there as well. Peter's done good it's like constitutional breakdowns. If people come in for case histories and you've gone into considerable detail, so it's great to actually see those play out and being able to apply. But could you maybe explain for people a little bit more about this kind of 9 domains? Very nice map, by the way.
You've been duly credited for that.
Yeah. I saw got credit.
It does look good, yeah.
It's really come up good. It's a nice simple map. It's basically an iris map that's been simplified into 8 zones, with the 9th, which is a sort of inner central area. So maybe give us a little bit of an overview of the idea behind the 9 domains and the iris.
Sure. I'd just like to say before I go there that one of the important premises of the book was that these applications, the behavioural, what we might call the behavioural applications, were implicit in Joseph Deck's work in the 1960s. So it wasn't completely, it wasn't just Jenny Ray Johnson and Reid. There are just, and I've written, I think it's chapter 3, where I've actually gone into Deck's structural types dispositions and made it very clear that he's laid the grounds for a sort of psychological understanding, a behavioral understanding, which I think is an important thing to put into the mix. But the 9 domains came about, and it was really initially it was focused on and based on the fact that when I started looking at behavioral charts and the RAID chart, to make sense of them for myself, I ended up chunking them, if you like, into this segment of the iris seems to be all about matters to do with what we might call kidney. From the Chinese perspective, the kidney is not just the organs, the kidney, but it governs the reproductive function. And I can never understand from looking at the iris chart from a conventional view why we've got the kidney at the bottom, whereas in fact it's in the middle of the back, you know? So why have we got the kidney at the bottom of the iris mixed in with the uterus and the ovaries and the testes, etc.? Why is that there? And I began to see, okay, so if we could sort of get that sector, it's approximately 60-degree sector or something at the bottom of the iris there, and call it kidney. Where would we go with that? Now, to be fully transparent, it was actually Harry who first sort of brought this into play when he started talking about things like kidney process and liver process and lung process. And then you could do the same with the others. You know, when you go to the behavioural chart, all the sort of difficult emotions of anger, frustration, resentment, blame, sibling rivalry, etc., occurred in the diagonal, the lower diagonal slices. And I thought, well, that sort of goes along with the TCM concept of liver in a way, which is not just, the liver in TCM isn't just an organ of filtration. For a start, it stores the blood. It has a big influence over the blood. But in terms of the expression of some kind of mental or emotional setting, it is also the way in which manages the way in which we respond to stress. This is a really important one. You know, if we get challenged in life, how do we respond to that? Can we respond effectively? And it seemed to me that, I mean, I think at the head of that chapter about the liver, I've got that quote from Johnny Rotten, John Lydon of the Sex Pistols. Anger is an energy. He wrote a book called, about his life called Anger is an Energy. And I thought this kind of encapsulates what I think about anger. It's a very difficult emotion, but it's there for something. You know, we don't have it for nothing, for no reason. We've got it for a reason. And the reason, it seems to me, is to be able to, first of all, I've reframed it as assertion. And, if we think of it as assertion, it becomes something different. We want something, so we go and get it, or do we? Yeah. Or we don't want something, so we block it. Or do we, so that the energy of assertion becomes really important. And all of the domains are sort of built up around those ideas. And they are very much connected with the organs that are in the domains as well. This is what I explain in each chapter. It's, if you look at the kidney, as I've said, it's about the kidney. It's got the leg down at 6 o'clock, that 6 o'clock stripe from the collarate border of the collarate to the iris edge is the leg. So the leg goes right the way through the kidney, and it seemed to have something to do with standing on your own 2 feet, sort of authenticity, being the author of your own life, being somehow individuated and capable of defining yourself as a person, and then of course the reproductive organs as well, seeming to comment on the fact that we are incarnate beings, So I was working with ideas that were generated by a mixture of the stuff I was finding on the maps, on the behavioral map and in the RAID map, and the actual organ correspondences themselves.
Yeah, I was thinking of that sort of liver being opposite like the eye. So in Ayurveda, we say like liver kind of fire, the pitta energy. The pitta is the eye. And then it's right next to, like you said, the feet area. So that the correspondence between eye and feet for pitta. So it's like the eye sees and the feet walk towards. So like we're motivated to go and get something to
Yeah.
So it all kind of works nicely. However, like I say, whatever model you choose to apply it, preference.
That's right. And of course, and it also reminds us that the energetic traditions probably have more in common than they may look very different from the outside, but we find similar things. So, for example, the eye is the opening on the skin of the liver meridian in TCM. So there's always this big connection between the eyes and the liver, which is quite interesting. And you're absolutely right. The diagonal slices. There's not much commentary on those. Tony Miller has gone into what she calls the diameters
Mm.
in quite some detail, and she has her own system for dealing with those. But I wanted to do, you know, my familiarity. I had familiarity with RAID because I've had Denny's book for decades, and I was familiar with behavioural, but because of you mainly, but also through having met Jim.
Mm.
And but I wanted. Outside of that, I didn't want to read too much of what other people had done.
Mm.
Frankly, I wanted really, because I've been using this, the missing link here, I guess, is that in my practice with working with people, and there are two elements to that. One is that I'm consulted by the chronically sick. I mean, I've got to the stage now where a lot of the people who seek my help are, presenting with cancer, diabetes, autoimmunity,
Mm.
really chronic situations for which they need a specialized kind of help. And so for that, you sort of end up being resolutely physical.
Mm.
If you start saying to somebody who's about to die of cancer, well, just think about what you're doing with your anger and stuff. It is relevant, but it's not going to save their lives.
I think that comes over in the book as well. When I was reading through the book, I like the way that you've talked about a particular domain and you've given an example, say, and then you refer it back to the physical model. The
Yeah,
physical map comes in again, and the fact that they nicely overlay on each other, so you get a good sense of one's
yeah.
activating the other. That's very prevalent in the book, and they've kind of done a nice graphic where you kind of zoom in on a magnifying glass, like you're sort of looking close at one part.
I did that, Andrew.
Oh, right. Yeah, it was very good. I like that. Yeah, it worked really well. I thought that's quite because you're always struggling, no matter how good the reproduction in the book. I mean, some of the areas are small, so it's nice to sort of zoom in and actually see what's going on in that area. So that was actually quite helpful.
Yeah, yeah, and that was the idea, and yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, you got it. But the other side of my practice has been as a pure iridologist. So people come to me saying, "Well, what's all this about the eyes? What can you see? What can you tell me about myself?" And I really like that too, because that we don't do the whole thing of I've got a case history form here. I don't have to fill all that out and go through the tick the boxes, etc. I just say, okay, let's look, and we put the eyes up on the screen and we explore them together. And I just bounce off what I'm interested in. I go to the first thing that calls me, if you like, and that's a very different way of practicing. But what I've found through doing that is that these domain segments that I've kind of invented here and put down in the book kind of work.
Mm.
If you read what I say about them, that isn't just me theorizing.
Mm.
It's what I've discovered through working with people and using that idea,
Mm.
what I've discovered to be true, or helpful. What I've discovered, ways of putting things, ways of articulating emotional concerns, behavioral concerns, etc. And behavior is an interesting one. The name behavioral iridology is a good name, but it's not mine. I had to find something else to call it. But it is, behavior is emotion acted out in physical form.
I see it as a natural progression anyway, because if you think about, say, for instance, you had like the red map, which if anybody's seen that, it's a rather, I don't know, I've got to be careful how I choose my words, slightly flowery and a bit random. It looks odd to look at because of the way that the zones are divided up. You've still got these kind of pockets where there's nothing, and you think, well,
Yeah,
what's going on there? Is there nothing happening? But it's
yeah,
just the way that the iris map was done and conceived in that system. And then obviously Jim came along, he looked at it all and said, yeah, it's a brilliant system. He was himself a RAID practitioner or a RAID master even for many, many years. But he said it needs to be pared down.
yeah,
We need to remove the unnecessary and just strip it down and get it. So he came up with a much more balanced looking map, or was inspired by a previous map that he had access to, and he kind of refined it again. And I see what you've done as the next step. You've kind of it's pared down and refined again. It's breaking it down into manageable bite-sized pieces that people can digest. If you have a map with many hundreds of positions on there, it's quite difficult to memorize all those. But if you just energetically divide it into areas, that's something you can carry with you very easily.
yeah. And that was the idea, to be able to give people a kind of reference point related to those sectors, that they could start to think through the issues. And my other big thing, which I make a lot of in the front end of the book, is that iridology is a resolutely linguistic practice. And it's one thing to see a sign and another thing to think to yourself what it means and do a diagnosis, if you like, quite another to communicate that to a person in a way that they're going to understand. And so a lot of the endeavor, I think, begins with the attempt to translate and interpret. And in the interpretation, the story, the narrative starts to come alive, starts to manifest. And I think that this is the other thing about certain ways of looking at things in emotional terms, is that it's more of an energetic reality than it is a firm diagnosis. Do you understand what I mean by that? It's more, we can use a number of different words to describe feelings that slot into the anger domain, if you like. We can, as I said before, we can have anger itself, we can have frustration, resentment, blame, sibling rivalry are some of the things that occur. Or just being a little bit peeved, or do you know what I mean? There are some degrees involved as well. And it's about finding the language that suits the experience of the individual. And that's what the Iris counselling kind of element of it that I've also inserted at the end of the book. There's a chapter on Iris counselling, because that was sort of an attempt to formulate an approach to the Iris which would probably, I think, based on the idea that as practitioners, we're part of the. I think this was an idea from Paracelsus. The physician acts as powerfully on the patient as the medicine itself. So we're part of the medicine.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
A consultation with us is a therapeutic focus all of its own, but it can't do that if you stand there in a white coat with a stethoscope and say, right, this means this and this means that. You get into trouble very quickly, as somebody once did on British television when he did that, and he was roundly condemned for it. But if you sort of go in as that's called the guide on the side, you sit there and you say, okay, so let's have a look at this. What does this mean? And talk them through it, and then you find the language that is appropriate to that individual, but not necessarily to the next individual. Yeah.
Is there anything you've touched on in there where, so RED and obviously behavioural as well, we're using the left and the right, so we're seeing like the left eye more mother, feminine, the masculine is the right eye father. Are there any differentiations made on those zonal areas according to the actual left or right iris, or is it just kind of mirroring? Is there any kind of, I mean, I haven't read it close enough to be able to say when you said this, did you mean that? But
so, for the purpose of this, I have really kept it simple, and it is a mirrored symmetry between the two eyes. With the ventral, because the eyes are either side of the nose, the temporal, nasal, frontal and ventral sectors matching each other. So there's no, I can't think that there are any particular differences. I mean, in the classical iridology map, one of the main differences that occurs is that in the right eye, in the 8 o'clock slice, we have the liver, and in the left eye, it's the spleen. But if you actually think about liver and spleen, and actually if you look into humoral medicine, you will very often find splenic affectations, like what they used to call, the accumulation of a hypochondriac melancholy, where the word hypochondriac refers to under the rib cage, not the way we think of that word. And the fact that the melancholy accumulates in that particular area, and it covers the liver as well. There's not such a big kind of differentiation between the liver and the spleen in that setup. And the language we use, if you vent your spleen, you're right in the territory of that. So I thought they were similar enough not to have to bring out a specific difference there. I do go very much along with the sort of maternal-paternal thing, but I have found that it is occasionally misleading as well. I haven't quite got to the bottom of that. I know I have read Denny on the subject, and I find it quite, I'm not quite satisfied.
I think that was really a lot of the early RED was that was a bit of an Achilles heel for it. Although I like the idea of the left and right brain idea that he was incorporating. I mean, it used to drive students nuts. This idea that they had to think left was right and right was left was an immediate no because everyone got so confused. I mean, it makes. I've just gone back to basics, and I've just said, look, you just look to the left eye for the mother, and anything that in there is structure that has a tendency to clear break down and disperse, whereas the right is a more building,
Yeah.
establishing kind of energy. So I've kept it very, very simple. I just avoided that left brain, right brain thing altogether because it does confuse people and they do get a bit, and like you say, it can be misleading sometimes. You've probably got like a 70-30 thing going on. So 70% of the time, if you're this type of constitution, you will have more structure in one eye or the other, but it's not a given. And
Yeah.
sometimes the odds can vary a bit. So, it's a point of interest, but yeah, I was just curious to see if you develop that at all. So just kind of wrapping up a little bit and just coming to the end of our conversation, I wanted to ask you about when you're in class. I noticed, obviously I've had some experience seeing you at CNM as well. You're using that microscope. It's got like an illuminated microscope to show. Are you still doing that in class? People sort of still, you plug it into the computer and it's like
Yeah.
yeah, so they can
Yeah.
actually.
It's like it's a kind of a digital microscope with a USB connection to any computer, really. Yeah.
And that's working. I've seen some examples of that.
Well,
That's a really quick way to get good images, isn't it?
it is, yeah, it is. It's kind of in the scheme of things, it's less expensive than some of the other options for sure. And so I find I am the UK distributor for that model actually, which comes from the Dynolite stable, and
Yep.
it's called the MEDL4R iriscope. And so the only place you can get those in the UK at the moment is through me.
Okay.
They made me their representative. The company, I think, is a Dutch company. So I've been promoted, and I think they're very good. I do think they're good. They've got a wireless model out now. If I'm totally honest, I'm not so happy with that. I prefer it doesn't for me. The connectivity is not good at the moment, or maybe that's just because I use a Macintosh, and
Maybe it's
I
a software thing or something. I
software thing. It
don't.
may, yeah, I don't, it doesn't work as well as I'd like it to. Now, the only problem with those things is, and I'm very clear about this, with iris imaging, you get what you pay for, and there's no doubt about it that some of the sort of high-end imaging systems that cost 2,500, 3,000, etc., are going to deliver you much better results. And some of my pictures, the pictures that I chose to illustrate the book came from a variety of different imaging systems. I haven't chosen them from one particular. They really do come from my files. I didn't take pictures, especially for the book. I chose them from what I'd already got from my library. So one of the shortcomings of any cowl system, where it sort of puts a cowl over the eye and you've got the little LEDs inside, is that it will actually flatten the image. You don't get much depth of field. To do that, you have to have one of those systems that comes in and lights from the side,
Mm.
so that you pick up the relief, particularly with furrows in the iris. You can't see them particularly well with that system, and that's the only you can, but it just takes a little bit more looking. That's the only complaint I have about it. I am actually in the market at the moment for a sort of larger and more more high-end system.
I'm quite impressed. There's one or two people I follow on Instagram, and they just do kind of point and shoot with a mobile phone with a clip. So they basically clip a lens, an additional lens over the top of the camera lens. It's got its drawbacks, but overall, providing that exactly.
On the hematogenic eyes, on the dark brown type,
Mhm.
it can be a bit of a problem, but
Yeah.
you can always go to your edit suite and just, change the exposure, and hey presto, you get a really good picture. It's good. I like it actually. And it's only 200 quid, so very affordable for most people.
I wondered whether that's why there's been a little bit of a resurgence lately in an interest in it, because capturing the image was always a problem, wasn't it? I remember when I started 2000, there was digital technology was just coming in. You had 1-2 megapixel cameras that sort of did an okay job with a ring flash. Now, like you say, with the sort of top end SLRs with proper lighting systems, it's actually pretty good. However, like the lens clip you just showed, you can actually get really decent images with them. So I wonder whether the accessibility has made this a bit more. People are seeing it as a viable option. It's coming in. Everyone has a cell phone, so
Yeah.
it's just becoming more popular because of that technology.
Absolutely, and it really is a boon for the classroom as well, because students are not renowned for having a great deal of money. Many of them, so it's going to challenge them even to get the digital one we talked about, the one that I am the agent for. You're going to have to fork up 600 quid these days for that. So something that comes in at a third of the price is really, really welcome. And yeah, I mean, it was a student who taught me in the initial stages how to use a standard iridology torch and loop with a mobile phone to take a picture, and it's this simple.
Oh, right, literally just put the oh my
over the
God.
lens like that.
Well, there you go, innovation.
Yeah.
Coming to the end, thank you very much for coming on, Peter, and talking to us. Just before we wrap up, how can people get hold of you? Obviously, the book, The Mind's Eye, Practical Iridology, both available from AEON Books. But if people want to have a consultation with you or wanted to study, or give us your
Absolutely. So my website is thenaturalcentre.com. You must spell centre the English way with an RE, not the American way. So thenaturalcentre.com. There is a button for ordering or requesting a consultation. There's a shop that hasn't got much in it at the moment, but it does have my iris chart, the one that your kind self brought to its latest incarnation, and does have both books, and it also has the other book in it as well, but I don't really have any of them left. So the original version of Practical Iridology I should probably be taken off right now, but the other two books are also available from me on my website as well.
And if people want to get in contact with you, you're open to do. Are you still doing consultations one-to-one?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I run online clinics. If you can put some of our ideas to practical use and send me some good pictures of your eyes, I will read them for you in an online session.
Right.
But I also do an in-person clinic in London twice a month.
Fantastic, great. Well, thank you, Peter. Thanks for coming on and speaking.
Pleasure. Thank you.
And yeah, well, take care. Good to speak to you.
Thank you.